Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. This one will be about taking care of mice, so if you're thinking about getting mice, then you're welcome to watch. In terms of overall requirements, they are pretty similar to hamsters, but there's some pretty major distinctions, so tune in and I will tell you all the stuff you need to know. But first, let's get into our disclaimer.
If you disagree with anything that I say, feel free to leave a comment down below. I've tried to make sure to get reliable information compiled into one place. Any mistakes are not intentional. This video is accurate and true to the best of my knowledge. It's not designed to be a substitute for diagnosis, treatment, prescription, prognosis, formal or individual advice from a veterinary medical professional.
The good news is that you're already on the right track, because the first thing you should do before you think about getting a mouse is definitely to do your research. Now, that can be videos like this, or you can even look up online. I wouldn't recommend talking to pet stores, as they tend to have quite limited knowledge on a variety of animals rather than specific knowledge about a specific animal or pet. And they can be very useful for, beginning setting things up, particularly things about certain products that they might sell, but not necessarily the animal care themselves. So always do outside research beyond just asking pet stores. It is good to have your cage set up before you get mice, so they're not overly stressed sitting in a pet carrier waiting to go into their new home. They can just settle right in and explore, particularly if travel's been added to it as well. Imagine traveling then sitting in this cramped little container for hours. It's probably not very nice. It can take a long time to get all the knowledge that you need, particularly about dietary requirements or the toys or specific products that you need to make sure that they're healthy. Online communities are actually a really good resource. A lot of times these communities have done a lot of the research for you and made them into handy little files that you can look at, and some of the information in this video is from such files. So they also keep up to date with new research, which can be really handy. Mice are prey animals, and as such they have very specific needs, particularly their cage requirements, diet and care, but we'll get into all that. But first I want to go over some of the types of mice that you might encounter. Now, you shouldn't keep wild mice as pets. I could probably do a whole video on why not. It's different if it's a rehabilitation environment, but in terms of actually keeping mice, you want to stick to the domesticated ones. But here are some of the coat types. Now we have satin, long hair, Astrex, normal and hairless. Of these, I've kept most of them. I don't think that I've kept the Astrex one, but that's it. The reason why that'd be important, because different colorations, different coats will have different health complications due to their genetics, so it can be very imperative. For example, I know that ginger mice tend to have a bit of an obesity problem. They tend to be slightly more overweight, and hairless mice with not having hair might be more prone to maybe getting injured, getting their skin caught on things because they don't have as thick of a fur to kind of cover them. So these are some things that you can look out for. And without further ado, we're going to move on to male or female, knowing the gender of your mouse. So just putting up an image on the screen, you can see that the females have two holes that are quite close together, whereas the males just have their one hole that they poop out of and then their other part slightly further down. So if you're looking for a male versus female, this is the way to tell. Don't hold them in this position very long, as it can stress them out. This position's only to be done while you're sexing them. Otherwise, they should never be picked up by their tails. Now, the first thing I will say is that you shouldn't be housing males and females together unless it is one unneutered male with a bunch of females. This can work, although it is anecdotal. For the most part, you want to be keeping a solo male mouse or a group of females. We have always kept groups of females. It can be very difficult for the male mouse to combat loneliness. You have to interact with them every day just to make sure that they're getting their social needs met. That's why it's recommended actually neutering the male and putting them with a group of females if you are going to get one. But obviously you shouldn't be raising baby mice if you're really inexperienced. There are extra complications that come with raising mice from newborns, so just watch out for that. For housing females, it is more than 2 minimum, but the recommended is actually 3. This is so that they can create their hierarchy and their social dynamic. The mice will have an alpha. You can house neutered males together, although there has been some speculation on whether the dynamics of this aren't as good, so that's why I say to house them with females, just to cover my basis. But they can be housed with neutered males if that's what you really want, but non-altered males cannot be housed with non-altered males or altered males. Neutering is risky, however. There is a higher chance of mortality just because they are very small and it's very expensive. It can be hard to find a vet that's actually willing to even do it because they are so small, so just watch out for that. Mice are omnivores, so they need a variety of food, so we're going to move on to food and diet. Now, they mainly eat plants and protein, but one thing that I will mention is that nuts and seeds tend to be very, very high in fat, so this can be an obesity risk. So a lot of times people will go with the standard pellets for their main food, and then then they'll add in things like the nuts and the treats later, but make sure that anything that you're feeding is mouse safe, because not everything that marketed towards mice and rats are necessarily safe for them. If you want to, you can also feed them insects. We used to get a massive bucket of dried mealworms and put it in their kind of substrate or their what they kind of bury into, and they loved foraging around and finding them. Now there is a mixture on whether you should feed them a kind of grain nut seed mix or whether you should go with the pellets. I would recommend going with the pellets just because you know that they're getting their nutritional needs met, and if you want to add in more stuff then you can. It also helps to combat pickiness. Now pickiness can occur when mice have a particular favourite food, they want to eat that all the time. If you're constantly feeding them mixes, they can just pick out what they like and they might not be getting all the nutrients they need from everything. So I would recommend sticking with a pellet for their main source of food, adding in little treats and things that they can forage for. Now when I was feeding my mice, we never actually had a food bowl of sorts. We would make them kind of scavenge for it. This is very stimulating for them, they enjoy doing this. Or if you want, you can even get a little jar, put some stuff in there and they can dig around for it like little dig boxes. That can be really cute and a good way of them to find their food. The only thing I would say is avoid putting food near where they sleep. This is just to avoid peeing and pooing in their bedding area, as this can be a source of ammonia. And if you want, you can even add in fruit and vegetables twice a week. Now if you're not already aware of this, you will need to give them clean water. This should be recommended changing daily if it's a bowl, or once a week if it's one of the bottles. Now mice do like fresh water, so as much as possible really. And another little pro tip is if you want to, you can put vitamins into their water to make sure that they are just getting everything. If you do see your mice having any problems with any foods, they can have allergies, so just be careful of that. And don't feed them any hay-based diets. So they can't actually digest hay very well. They're not rabbits or guinea pigs, so avoid that. Other things that you want to avoid: seeds are very good for a treat, but they can be very fattening, particularly sunflower seeds. Also avoiding corn, because this is just a deficit in nutrients. Now one little fun fact is that mice can't actually tell when they're full, so they will just constantly eat. Now if you are struggling to find mouse food, then rat food can be appropriate. Hamster food, even though I said at the beginning, they can be similar in terms of cage requirements, but they're not similar in terms of diet, so they will not be appropriate. So now we're going to move on to the most important section, the cage and housing. So I've been doing a lot of research on the different mouse cages that you can have. You can put them in aquariums with a wire mesh top, as long as they're a minimum of 10 gallons. You can do barred up cages, but really you kind of want something with more height. Mice tend to like height, whereas hamsters don't require height. So it's not just about the floor space that they have, but how much they actually have to explore and to kind of burrow in. You want something with a nice depth that you can stack your bedding or your substrate on, that they can burrow, they can make little hides. Our mice love to make tunnels under their sawdust. I say sawdust, it wasn't sawdust. But one of the most important things is that you do have a lid. I know that sounds pretty self-explanatory, but you don't want them to escape. They can jump. I have seen a mouse jump, so be very wary of that. They can be quite good jumpers. So just because you have a large space at the top doesn't mean that they can't get out. And they're also very good at chewing through things, so be careful of that too. Though they shouldn't chew on the cage too much unless they're stressed in their home. That can be a sign that the mouse isn't too happy. But just for the basics, you want to make sure that you have lots of different hides, lots of stuff to do, and I will go over a bit of a tutorial on how you can kind of set this up. Obviously keep the cage away from direct sunlight, drafts, kind of similar to aquariums. You don't want really big temperature fluctuations. Where there's a stable temperature will probably be the best for them. Mice are nocturnal, so they're not a big fan of sunlight, so try and keep them away from that as much as possible. Now one thing to consider is if you want to have your mouse cage in your room, they do make quite a lot of noise at night. That is when most of them are up and about. You can hear them scampering around, eating things, even on their wheel. Just doing mouse stuff. So if you are a light sleeper, it might not be the best to have them in your room. But also a lot of times we like to have smelly stuff in our room, like candles or incense, and you want to try and keep that away from the cage, as it will be quite overwhelming for their senses. And obviously if you have other pets, Don't let them near the mice. Mice can be frightened by loud noises, and again, they are prey animals, so be kind. If you are looking for things to put in your mice cage, avoid things such as shavings from pine or cedar, as the fumes from these wood can be quite toxic to mice. Mice need opportunities to chew, burrow, hide, climb, all of these things, so make sure you are buying appropriate toys. Try and avoid anything that's a soft plastic, as they can chew it and that can hurt their intestines, but otherwise most things tend to be okay. Just make sure that you're keeping your mouse's health in mind. Now, if you are going for a barred cage, you want nothing that is bigger than 0.8 centimeters wide, as this can be escapes. Basically anything the mouse's head can fit through, the mouse can fit through. Even going over that by a little bit can mean that they can get through. If you need to, you can always buy additional metal mesh to cover it, but just be wary of that. As I said earlier, you will be needing to take height into account. They love to climb and dig. Floor space is actually important as well though. If you have to choose between the height or the floor space of your tank, try and choose floor space so that they can just run around, but height is very important too. The designated minimum is 10 gallons, but always aim for over the minimum for the best care. I think the recommended that I found was 20 gallons for an aquarium. Obviously the more space that they have, the happier they will be, but one thing you might not know or have covered is the fact that mice actually like clutter. Now, if you imagine that the mouse was in the wild, big open spaces would definitely be a risk factor for predators to be able to swoop them up, so they always like going undercover. Big open spaces in their cage can stress them out, so mice love everything to be jumbled in together and very cluttered. Another thing that's very important to consider is their ventilation, making sure that they're getting enough air in the cage, enough oxygen. Now, this isn't a worry if you're buying the barred cages or you have wires on your cage, but if you do have a big box or you're DIYing it, you might want to consider how much air is actually getting into it. If there is a large space where air can freely flow into the cage, you tend to have enough ventilation. If it's a vivarium or something like that that's used for plants, or even one that's used for reptiles, they can sometimes not have as much ventilation and might not be appropriate. Drilling holes isn't enough ventilation for a mouse and can provide escape opportunities, so be wary of that. If you do see any moisture or condensation in the cage, there isn't enough ventilation. And now that we've kind of talked about the cage, I'm going to move on to the bedding. Now, the bedding is the layer of material in the cage. I think I referred to it as sawdust before, though I do not put sawdust in my cages, but you can also see it sometimes called substrate. Mice have very sensitive respiratory systems, so you need it to be dust-free, scent-free, and baking soda-free. Bedding is one of the most important aspects of a mouse's life. This means that having adequate bedding is essential for your mouse's health. Must be unscented, be able to hold strong burrows, and needs to be at least 4 inches deep, though it is ideal to have 8 to 15 inches. Again, the minimums are like the absolute minimums, not the recommended. Some people love having lots of bedding because they can make their intricate little burrows, though you don't need as much bedding as that. But the more bedding that you do have, it will control the smell of your mouse cage. Now, one thing that's important to consider is that males will have a stronger odor to females, but females can also scent mark. If you do have a male, you might need to clean them more often. Mice pee tends to have quite a strong smell of ammonia, so the more ammonia absorbers you have in the bedding, the less smelly it will be. Aspen, hemp, kiln-dried pine are probably the best as the main substrate. However, there are several other enriching substrates. Some people recommend mixing different types so that you can get the benefits of both. Aspen bedding tends to hold ammonia better than paper bedding, so it would be better to go with a wood substrate as opposed to a paper substrate, though it is up to you. Paper bedding has been known to cause health issues, so if you do want that kind of softer aspect, it would be best mixed with other substrate. The substrate can't be too sharp or smell too strongly. Do keep in mind that the more bedding you have, you are less likely to see your mice, especially up on the surface. They are very happy just tunneling in there. If you want to make sure that you're getting as much bedding in there as possible, you can always compress it down, as the mice, as they're walking around and building their tunnels, they will close off those air bubbles that were put in when you initially put it into the tank. That can mean that you're getting the most in. And without further ado, we will be moving on. Now I'm going to be talking about cage supplies. Now this is going to be everything that you need for your mouse cage. Again, I will be talking about the minimums, but we know what we've said about minimums for the best care above and beyond. So we already talked about bedding. For a bare minimum, what you will need as your cage supplies will be your bedding substrate, nesting material, which is essentially their bed, food and water, hides tunnels, chew toys, and to provide the best care, something that they can exercise on, climbing/hanging toys, foraging toys, boredom busters, and platforms and shelves. Now, as I said earlier, there are lots of toys and things on the market that should be avoided. Not only are they not made from mouse-safe products, but a lot of times these companies will sell toys for profit and not actually think about the health of the mouse. Things that are made from cloth, fabric, cotton should be avoided because fabrics can wrap around them, things like that. Other things that can be dangerous for them can be exercise balls, edible hides, basically things that their toes or their feet can get stuck in can be very dangerous. There can be bedding that's unsafe, there can be nesting material that's unsafe, untreated wood, dust baths and sands, they are not chinchillas, litter that clumps, and I know we talked about clumping litter for cats, but they are not suitable for your mice. If you are struggling with the mice smell, you probably need to change your substrate or get them away from areas that make them unsafe, that feel like they need to mark. Now, we'll go over this a little bit in the cleaning section because it could be that you are over cleaning, which is causing them stress, making them feel that they need to redefine their territory if smelly mice is a problem for you. So when I'm talking about nesting material, what am I talking about? I said earlier that it is basically their bed. It is what your mice like to sleep in. Now, this will be softer than the bedding that you have as your substrate, as this is where they like to get all cozy and snuggle together. Your mice will love sleeping together. They are very cute doing so. Now, I have not personally had any issue with this, but there are materials that are not recommended, such as cotton materials, as they can wrap around toes, cut off circulation, it can be ingested. As I said, I've never had an issue of that happening. However, for top mouse safety, you want to avoid these. Nesting material that is really useful is shredded paper or cardboard, tissue or toilet paper, kitchen roll. Now, one thing about when you are putting the nesting material in the cage is not to just put it where they usually sleep. It'll be much more stimulating for them if you spread it around the cage. That forces them to have to collect it and bring it back and then make their own little bed. Mice are very intelligent creatures and they need a lot of enrichment, so doing that can just be really fun. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about quickly is chew toys and why they're particularly important. So mice's teeth actually continue to grow throughout their life, so that is why they gnaw on things, it is to get it down. And one of the reasons that you want to avoid the edible hides is because a lot of times they're made out of food and wood. That means that they can accidentally ingest the wood when they're trying to get to the food, which can cause digestion issues. They can't digest wood. So it's important to get things that can get their teeth down appropriately without causing them harm. So I'm going to talk a little bit about wheels. Now, wheels aren't actually compulsory for mice like they are for hamsters, but here are some things to keep in mind when you're picking a wheel. Now, you can get the flying saucer wheels. These can be very nice because the mice can run as if they're running on a flat ground. However, because they don't have the edges, they can fly off, they can get injured. So it shouldn't be a replacement for a proper wheel. A proper wheel should still be able to accommodate the mouse running as if it's on flat ground without their back being arched or bent, but it'll provide the security that they're not going to injure themselves. And again, nothing where their feet can go through or edges on it that are too sharp. So with all of that being said, we're going to move on to cleaning. Mice can get stressed if you remove all of their bedding from the cage weekly or even monthly. It's better to do a daily spot check. This is removing any soiled bedding that is sitting at the top of the cages or cleaning any spoiled toys. So poop piles should be taken care of, water bowls rinsed daily to prevent buildup, and 2/3 of the bedding every 1 to 2 months. This means that you're not taking away all the smells that they're familiar with. They don't feel like they have to re-establish their territory every time you clean them, and it will help them feel more secure in their environment. The more bedding you have, the less smelly it will get, and could even require less cleaning because ammonia is very present in their pee and can be very smelly. When you buy new products, remember to properly sanitize them. This is because, pests can hit your ride and make it into your cage. If you're wondering about when's the best to clean, since it varies depending on how many mice you have, how much bedding you have, and the size of the cage, it only really needs cleaned out when it starts to smell from the outside while you're standing at it. But be wary that you're not over cleaning, stressing them out, causing them to scent mark, which will make them more smelly anyway. And I've already talked about scent marking and some of the reasons that scent marking can occur, but it is done to establish their territory, to communicate to other mice about their social status, sexual status, health, and to build up familiarity with their environment. If you find that they're getting smelly every week, it could just be that you're over cleaning them. So you can use a disinfectant to do your cleaning. Some people even use a solution of 50% vinegar, 50% water to kill bacteria. It it's kind of up to you. Don't forget to clean the bars, as dirt can build up on there too, but really you want to just be removing the dirtiest parts of the bedding and leaving the cleanest parts. With all that being said, I'm going to move on to behavioural things with mice, signs of stress, signs of happiness. So if you're looking for signs of stress, if their ears are pointed down or back, if they're over grooming themselves, if they're super restless, running around the place all the time, if their tail is wagging, these can be signs that your mouse isn't happy with their environment, that there's something that they can sense which is stressing them out, and you should try and identify what that is. Tail wagging is a warning, a sign to other mice to leave them alone. Slapping, pushing, shoving, and humping, these are all signs of dominant behaviours. It is common when you are first introducing mice that they might do some of these to show who's the alpha, show who's the dominant one. Squeaking isn't something to necessarily be worried about unless there is blood. Now, with mice, the thing is that if there is blood, then that is a sign that things are really bad. And they shouldn't escalate to the point where they're pinning, scraping, or biting. If there is no then everything tends to be fine. Mice tend to have little spats between each other sometimes. We had one mouse that used to squeak when she didn't want to be groomed anymore, so every time that the other mice would attempt to groom her, she would squeak. It can depend a lot on the context of why they're squeaking. Sometimes they'll squeak when they're squabbling over food. You can think of it as sibling chatter. Now, if they're happy, they actually have quite a few things to show if they're happy, and I'm going to tell you a few of them. So their ears pointed upwards, playing, active, burrowing, exploring, running on their wheel, but not being like super hyperactive. Teeth grinding and grooming. Now, teeth grinding we used to call chattering. That's when they kind of put their teeth together, and this is also called ruxing or boggling. But it can also be a sign of stress. The context of this really matters. When they're doing it, why they're doing it. For example, our mice used to chatter when we hold them, which was very sweet. But if, for example, they're doing it a lot in their cage, if they're using it as a method of grinding down their teeth, that can be a sign of stress. Mice do actually talk to each other in a frequency that we can't hear. They do squeak also, so all that to keep in mind. Grooming is certainly one of them. They groom themselves and each other. It's a sign of contentment, particularly if it's during introductions. But beware if they start balding or over grooming, as that can be a sign of stress. There is a behaviour called popcorning or sparking, where they kind of hop around the cage. This can be after you've cleaned it. They might get excited. If you move stuff around, this can be quite exciting for them. They can be quite interested in things that have changed. Monkey barring or monkeying is also a thing that they do, where they climb over things, and they can also climb upside down, like on top of the cage, and it can have multiple different meanings. It can be a sign that they just love to climb. We had one mouse that really loved to climb over things, but it can also be a sign that the enclosure is inadequate if there's not enough space for them. It could be a sign that they're bored, or it could be a sign that they want to come out the cage. This is if you have a playroom or they're used to coming out the cage. It can be a sign that they're signaling to you, hey, I'm trying to get out. If they are chewing the bar or excessively chewing their cage, this could be a sign as well that their cage is too inadequate, too small. It could be a sign that they don't have things to grind their teeth down, so they're resorting to the bars. So this can either be mitigated by adding boredom busters or upgrading cage size. Some people love having playtime with their mice, buying playpens. Now, the playpen does need to be appropriate for the mouse. I'm not going to include that in this video, but it is something that you can consider. It also means while you're cleaning, you can put them in the playpen and not have to worry about them. But I could make up probably a whole nother video on mouse playpens. This is just the basics that you need, and this is certainly an extra. Playpens can also be helpful if you have a male that doesn't have any tank mates. It will provide another form of enrichment and another form of socialization with you. So now I'm going to talk about mouse taming. Now, mouse taming's pretty interesting because mice can develop a strong bond with people, but they are certainly more social with each other than they are with humans. They're usually quite shy and scared of humans. Now, I've found this is why it's really important to get your mice from a breeder that handles them from a very young age. It will be so much easier to bond with a mouse that has been handled since birth than trying to train your mouse yourself, particularly if you're inexperienced. So getting them from local breeders can be very helpful for this. However, for the most part, mice aren't super cuddly creatures. There are exceptions, of course. Males tend to bond with humans a bit better, and we did have a situation a time ago where we ended up having one mouse because her tank mates were elderly and eventually they pass on. We handled her every day and she ended up being very cuddly with us, but that is a rarity and an exception. Different mice do have different personalities. You're going to have some mice who are much more tolerant to you than other mice. We've had mice that have been very intolerant to handling and will give us a warning nibble. We have had other mice who could spend hours just crawling all over us, sitting in our hand, letting us stroke them. It really is mouse dependent. If you want to know how to correctly handle your mouse, never pick them up by the tail. This is directly linked to their spine and it can cause injury to them. Avoid picking them up from above or from behind. This is because they are a prey animal. It will give them a fright. So try and do the scooping action. Avoid gripping and grabbing motions. They are quite slippery, but you can do it. Now, I've never been able to do this, but you can train your mice to come into your hand naturally. You use treats, they can come into your hand and lift them up. That is the best way. It's never worked out for me, but it can be done. If they are really untamed, you can use their little hides that they're in and pick them up. That be toilet roll, whether it be a tunnel, and that can be very useful. So the best way to get your mice to be tame with you is consistency. You have to do it every single day if they are untamed, and then once they're tame, you can do it less. We only handled our mouse once a week and they were fine with this, sometimes even less. Once they get used to you and they know that you're safe, they tend to generally be okay with it. Wash your hands with unscented soap. If your hands smell of food, they could eat you or bite you even. Sometimes this can even happen anyway. Mice will do a warning nibble if they are trying to test that you are food, but this can also be an indication that they won't put down. Just be patient during this process. When you're initially getting them used to your hand, don't move it around a lot. Try and keep it still and stationary, get them used to coming on and off it, and then eventually you can kick them up and carry them around, but just very slowly, gradually introducing it. As the mouse gets more confident, you do more things with them. Like I said, we've never had to tame our mice per se because we get them from someone who handles them regularly, but these are all things to keep in mind. And now I'm going to move on to common health issues. Now, these is more of a sadder topic when we talk about health issues. I feel like it is important to go over so that you can see the signs for yourself. So some of the health issues I will go over can be due to genetics, it can be due to just mice living life, pretty unavoidable. If it lives, it can get ill, so. Now, the one that I have the most experience with out of all of them is tumours. Now, if you didn't know, mice actually have mammary glands over 80% of their body, so it's pretty impossible to avoid mice getting tumours one day without removing most of the mouse. So mice can develop cancer just like anyone else. Most of the mice that I've had over the years, this has been their cause of passing. They typically don't appear until they're over a year old, but you can be unlucky and see them in young mice too. You have to decide whether you want to try and treat the cancer or not. A lot of times cancers can move very quickly. Other times they can be alive for a couple of months with the cancer. Sometimes the only option is to get pain medication or for them to be euthanized. Trying to do surgery is incredibly risky due to how small the mouse is. You might put them in danger anyway and cause them to pass. And all the smells of all the drugs and things like that will make the other mice on edge as well. Although the mice can smell the cancer on the other mouse. It is very unfortunate, but it's really down to how comfortable you and your vet feel and what options they're willing to take with you, whether they're skilled enough to do a surgery like that, whether you're willing to pay such a big expense for something that could result in their passing anyway. We've often done it that if their time is coming, then we monitor them until we feel they don't have a quality of life or they're in pain or they're suffering, and then we them. We do this because we think it's the kindest way. I think that putting a lot of stress on such a small body would be quite detrimental to them, and the vet that we discussed this with did specialise in small creatures, so we trusted her opinion on this. That's how we dealt with it. They should be put to sleep if they show signs of pain, difficulty moving, eating or drinking. Now, as I said earlier, obesity is a very common sign. I've only had like 3 obese mouse in all the mice that we've had, but it is particular in yellows, gingers, brindle and reds. I also think hairless might carry this because the 2 hairless mice we had ended up being quite chonky, but I don't know that one for sure. That was just a personal experience. So even when the mice eat a healthy, balanced food, they can become severely overweight and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. We did try and do a little diet. I do not recommend that. They will start squabbling over food and it will make them wholly unhappy. So don't restrict their food. food. They do have shorter lifespans on average, although we've not seen that in our mice, but they can, and they can be prone to kidney issues. If all of your mice are overweight, it could be something that you're feeding them. The diet could be unbalanced. Maybe there's too many seeds, there's too many fatty foods. If this is the case, then try and reduce the number of treats that you give them. Try and change them to a more nutrient-rich food and feed them less of it. It's very easy to overfeed mice since they can't actually feel their stomach being full. It's best to try and cut down until you find a point where they're eating most of their food. Upper respiratory infections are also common, or URIs. Their respiratory system is very sensitive. This is usually caused by aerosols, scented candles, dusty bedding, poor air quality, stress, poor ventilation, allergies, or potentially genetics. So if they do have this, you will start to hear wheezing, coughing, laboured breathing, crackling breaths, or making audible squeaks. Skin issues can actually be quite common in mice, so it could represent multiple different health issues. It's just something to look out for. It could be nutritional, over grooming, mites, allergies. Now, mites are something that's particularly interesting because they actually have mites on their skin anyway, much like we do. We have lots of different organisms. I think some even live in our eyes. But when the mice comes stressed, it can cause their immune system to not fight off these mites appropriately. That can cause them issues. They can get scabs on them. They can get bald patches. If this does happen, it's best to just clean out their cage, do a full clean. If you have mite treatment available, you can use that. But a lot of the times, if you just find what the mice is stressed about and fix it, then their immune system should be able to fight these mites off without treatment. The environment that the mouse in is too cold, so they can get something called torpor. The best treatment for this is to just slowly warm up the mouse's body. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about elderly mice. Now, elderly mice are mice that are considered over 1 year of age. They can have a variety of different health issues. Some are serious, some are pretty mild, such as poor eyesight, poor hearing, slight weight loss, thinning of the fur, less agility. They aren't anything to worry about unless they turn more serious. If they are struggling with their mobility, you might need to downsize. Just make sure that they can reach everything that they need to, that there are less things for them to injure themselves on, and lowering their protein intake can also be useful too. I'm not going to go over pregnant mice in this video, as I feel that if you are just starting out and taking care of mice, you probably shouldn't be looking to get your mouse pregnant. And with all that being said, we have reached the end of the video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something new. I feel a bit out of practice. I feel like I haven't really done this in a while, and I feel a little uncomfortable actually. I need to get used to being in front of the camera again. I'm not a super Instagram girly, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Like, comment, subscribe. I try and post videos every week when I can, and I will see you next time. I've been thinking for my next video I could go back to aquariums, do a little shrimp video, since I have little shrimp babies now, so it's fun watching them swim around. Or I could do what to do if you find a wild mouse. So let me know what you think. Give me your thoughts and opinions down below, and I will see you lovely peeps next time. Bye!